misfires spooked Rust producers so much, they ended up going back to veteran armourer Sarge Rasmussen, this time pleading with him to work on the film.
And I said I'd already taken a job, thank you, but I couldn't do it.
Did you guys know that the Rust producers were so spooked? That is according to what an investigative journalist discovered on from 60 Minutes Australia, that you had these accidental discharges, right? And it was so serious that it concerned the producers enough that they went back to someone that they'd offered a job earlier. I think his name is Sarge Rasmussen, right? This guy. They'd originally gone to him, offered him a job, and then they went behind his back and offered the same job to Halyna. And obviously, the difference was that the job they offered Halyna was armorer plus props person, and he only wanted to be the armorer. And then after a certain period of time, they came back to Sarge Rasmussen and said, okay, we want to hire you after all. And then he said, sorry, I've got other things going on, right? Did you know that? Did you know that the producers kind of, it seems like they realized they made an error, and then they went back to the more experienced armorer, and then it was too late. And this is before the incident. So in other words, they went to Sarge, offered him the job, he accepted the job, then they seemed to change their minds, and then they sort of went kind of behind his back. Okay, come. They went kind of behind his back and then offered the job to Gutierrez-Reed, and obviously the job had was armorer plus, right? And then obviously there were these incidents, and then they came back to Sarge Rasmussen, and by then he'd sort of moved on, right? Don't you think that kind of changes things in a way? Don't you think that kind of seems to suggest the producers did know something was going on? So Zircon says, did not know. Who cares says that's big. Lorraine says, I didn't know that. Yeah, he would have been excellent. And so one thing that comes across, and I'll put a link to this documentary in chat. One thing that comes across is he talks about as the armorer, you sort of watch your weapons like a hawk, that there's no place for messing around and thinking about other things. You get the idea that he takes his job so conscientiously that he's sort of very worried and very obsessively, compulsively keeping stock of where the weapons are and what is going on with all of them. And that's exactly the kind of armorer you want. You want an armorer like this guy, right? Now, if you just look at his face, he's sort of a grizzly, he's a very experienced guy, right? He's been around the block. Or do you want a 20-year-old who's sort of got dyed hair and is sort of loosey-goosey? Who do you want handling your weapons, right? Do you want someone who's sort of worked once before on a movie set and you can pay a very low wage? Or do you want someone like this guy who's one of the best, but he's going to be quite expensive? Which one do you sort of want? And so if we go back to the poll, I asked you guys, why do you think this incident happened, right? And there are a couple of options. Do you want to change your vote? Do you want to change your vote? So even if Baldwin pulled the trigger, well, if there was a blank in there, it wouldn't have done anything. And who would have made sure that there wasn't a blank in there? So Timmy, I think I'm going to put you down. So that was the first thing I wanted to share with you guys. There's also been some additional news of late that you may not be aware of. For example, the ALEC Baldwin wants one of the prosecutors off the case. He says there's a conflict of interest. Where have we heard that before? I must say it's hard for me to make a call on that. But we can talk about that in a moment. And then the other thing is Baldwin is going to be facing a list of 44 witnesses. That includes members of the crew, that includes other actors. That's quite a few people on the list that appear to be testifying against him. Another thing that's a surprise, something that I learned today, I suspected it all along, but it's now been confirmed that Dave Halls did take a plea deal, and guess what? He's not on that list. You're not going to see Dave Halls testifying against Baldwin or even testifying at all. And that does seem to suggest that Halls, I mean, we know he took a plea deal. That's now in black and white. And I guess that basically means he admits guilt in terms of a certain aspect, but it then also allows him to avoid all the negative publicity of a trial. He's not, although he's a very crucial witness, he's not going to be sort of called to testify. Did you guys know that? I mean, I was convinced that we got to the point that we did because of Dave Halls, like going over to the other side, and now that's been confirmed. So that's the other thing. And then I want to take you through, and it's very important. I really want the mods to pay attention to what I'm about to say. SM Kovalinsky, good to see you there. We're going to go through what I believe is the reason the incident happened. And that's not to kind of make the case to say, like, I don't want people in chat saying, like, quote, Alec Baldwin is guilty, exclamation mark. That is for the courts to decide. What we want to figure out is, why did this take place, right? Like, what's the process and the mechanism that occurred that caused this to take place? And I've already provided you with sort of some of the answer to that, which is to do with the armorer. But then why was there this attitude to the armorer in the first place? And so we're going to go and look at that, right? So aloha, Iceland, good to see you as well. So please just make sure in chat, I don't want to see people saying Alec Baldwin is guilty, exclamation mark. If someone does that, please give them a warning. If they do that again, just kick them off, right? Because it's a legally sensitive situation, and Alec Baldwin, you know what I mean? We've got to be careful. So what we're trying to do is find out how this took place. We don't really want to, we don't want to be inside the church pointing fingers in terms of this discussion. Does that make sense? So thanks a lot. So there we go. Okay, so I want to take you guys to this article. By the way, for those who want to watch this documentary on 60 Minutes Australia, you can have a look at that link. I'll put it in the description as well. But we want to look at this article from Fox News. Alec Baldwin files motion to remove special prosecutor in the Rust case. And to be honest, I haven't really thought about it a lot. I haven't really applied my mind to it. So it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think. Do you think, I mean, bear in mind what's happened with the Koberger case. On the one hand, it felt like there was a real conflict of interest in terms of the death certified defense attorney, right? And look where we are now. She's still on the case, right? So even if something looks extremely obvious in a certain way, the legal process may be a little more subtle than we realize. And so the question is, does that apply here as well? So it says here, Alec Baldwin's lawyer filed a motion Tuesday, in other words, today, to have Special Prosecutor Andrea Reeve removed from the Rust case just days after he was charged. So what's quite interesting there is there was no, this has been going on for a long time. Andrea Reeve was the prosecutor for months already. And so to come now, now that I'm being charged, I don't want this prosecutor involved, right? So I think that's one counter argument. But his point is that Reeve can't simultaneously serve as the special prosecutor and as a member of the New Mexico House of Representatives. And I think the argument he's making is you can't have someone who's a lawmaker and then also someone practicing in the law at the same time. And I guess my thought about the whole thing is, practically speaking, if the lawyer did want to create a law to benefit herself in this whole situation, well, how long does it take to, how can I put it? How long does it take it to put together legislation and have it passed? And then also the timing of the trial itself. In other words, practically speaking, could you have someone who really wants to influence the outcome, create a law, and then that then becomes part of it? Something tells me that process would take such a long time, and it would be obvious if there's that conflict of interest. In other words, if you said, can we make it a law that if an actor fires a gun, then that's ... It would be absolutely obvious that it was that kind of conflict of interest, because all those laws that are being set in motion are obviously legislated, they're written down, and it would be abundantly obvious what's going on. So I don't know whether it's, I kind of agree with Yvonne. It does feel like a stall tactic. It kind of feels like what some people describe as Stalingrad tactics. You find anything to burden the prosecution, right? Another thing that's really interesting in terms of the legal narrative is it looks like Baldwin has asked for a fast-track trial. He's asked to speed the trial up. Now, if you're familiar with the Caitlin Armstrong case, she hired this crack attorney, a really, really good attorney who was previously a prosecutor, so understands that side as well. And he also asked for a fast-track trial, which basically forces the prosecution to do a lot in a short time. It forces them to hand over documents, do that and that and that and the next thing. In other words, it creates a situation of not impatience, but of rushing. It rushes the other legal team. And then what happened in the Caitlin Armstrong case, as soon as they got all the documentation, they said, oh, no, we don't want a fast-track trial. Now we're going to deal with that, and the next thing. So I've got an idea. This could be a stall tactic as well. Sorry, not a stall tactic, a strategic tactic to trick, to wrong foot the prosecution. On the other hand, you can understand how it could be, that Baldwin wants to make this movie and he wants to limit the PR fallout. And so he wants it over and done with as soon as possible. So that is definitely possible. So I guess we're going to find out. We'll find out which way it is. Okay, so from this article, this is from Deadline. Alec Baldwin, fatal rush shooting, DA's witness list full of crew members from troubled indie Western. So some of the crew members include Sarah Zachary, right? So Sarah's the prop person. She's going to be testifying against Baldwin. Another person that's not a surprise is Sergei Svetnoy. Another person that's also not a surprise is Mamie Mitchell. They both lodged lawsuits. I'm just trying to think who else. One of the actors testifying against Baldwin or for the prosecution is Jensen Ackles, and he basically said, I checked the gun every time I was handed the gun. And so that's one actor we know of who had a different what do they call it? Let's call it a work ethic. And so he's going to be talking about that. One wonders whether any of the other actors are going to, and is that going to have a bearing on whether they appear in Rust or not? One also wonders, will Jason Ackles keep his role in Rust, right? I think the armorer mentor Seth Kenny is also going to be testifying. And I'm trying to see who else. I think Joel Souza is another one that has been called to testify, so the director. And again, you've got to wonder, well, if the director is going to testify against sort of the producer, is Baldwin going to want him to continue making the movie? It really does make you wonder what the hell is going to happen. It kind of feels a bit like a shit show, right? And then also a producer's been called to testify, Gabriel Pickles. So that's just a couple of the people that have been called to testify for the prosecution. Just trying to see if there are any other names that I've missed here. So this is where it says Hall stuck a plea deal. There it is in black and white. Let me make it a bit bigger. Hall has struck a plea deal with the DA's office, and so he escapes further prosecution, and his agreement with the DA remains unclear. So there it is in black and white. And what's quite interesting in the Australia 60 Minutes documentary, you have the I think it's a stunt coordinator basically saying that Hannah and Halls called out cold gun. And I don't know, like, that doesn't sound right to me. I kind of have a different version where no one actually said cold gun. But I mean, it's not in the probable cause affidavit. But anyway, there you have confirmation that Hall struck a plea deal, so he's not going to be. You'd think that he would be like either a star witness for the defense or a star witness for the prosecution, and he's now not part of this at all, kind of thing. So it's quite a sort of weird situation where we are now, that you've got 44 people that are going to be testifying to for the prosecution. When if you think about the early days of Rust, you had Baldwin saying, Lane Loop is also going to be testifying. In the early days of Rust, you sort of had this impression almost of there's one or two outsiders. Do you remember when he gave that ABC News interview? He sort of said, there's been one or two people saying things that I don't really agree with, or that is not always perhaps a distortion of the truth. And now I sort of feel like I want to set the record straight. And now where we are on this side of time, 44 people, many of them from the Rust set and from the Rust production. It kind of puts a different perspective on everything. Okay, so from Sky News, by the way, if you want to read this article, sorry, let's just bring it back. If you want to read this article, I'll put it in chat. Good article from Deadline. And then there's another one. Alec Baldwin's legal team seeks to disqualify special prosecutor. So I must say, I've got some legal knowledge, but this is starting to get quite in quite a specialized area, and it's difficult for me to make a call on whether it's fair or not to have the special prosecutor. When I say I think the special prosecutor could stay, maybe I'm just being biased. I don't know. I just find it a little bit of a reach to say that someone's going to be making laws while the case is going on. It just seems a bit far-fetched to me. So, but anyway, he says it's unconstitutional, and his argument is basically the state's constitution prohibits Ms. Reed from serving both as a prosecutor and as a state lawmaker. Now, you would imagine, just like with the Koberger case, that the the public defender would know if there's something prohibiting her from performing her role. You'd think that someone with that kind of knowledge of the law would know that she's automatically disqualified. And look where we are now. She's still part of the legal narrative. And you would imagine that exactly the same applies in this case. I've got a feeling it could be, and this is just speculating, but it could be trying to, it might be an effort to try to, question, try to undermine the confidence that a prospective jury might have in the legal thing. And then you say, you know what, this proceeding is unfair to me. People are going after me for my money. You know what I mean? It could be something like that. It's also interesting that in the Murdoch case, you've also got people recusing themselves and that sort of thing. It's quite interesting when you are dealing with many current cases at the same time to see certain things that are similar and certain things that aren't. So anyway, the motion reads, Representative Reeb is not constitutionally permitted to serve simultaneously as a legislator and a special prosecutor. So we'll find out if that's the case. If you think about what Baldwin's lawyers have been saying all along, that it's a miscarriage, and what is the thing that they said early on? They said something about the health and safety report and the fine that Russ got for that exonerates our client. That was the one position they took, and the other one was that the FBI report isn't. I don't know. I can't remember what they said, but they basically disagreed with that as well. And then you kind of got to say, based on their responses there, how legitimate is this? Right? Okay. And then the other thing I want to deal with, and this takes us into the script that I prepared for today. I actually wrote it January 27th, so about 10 days ago. Sheriff's report on Rush shooting doesn't find the source of the live rounds. Did you guys know that? So more than 2 months ago, on November 18, 2022, the New York Times dived into the then just released Sheriff's investigative report. And it was kind of a surprise to find out that the live rounds didn't seem to come from the armorer, right? In other words, the 552-page report didn't say the live rounds came from Seth Kenny, and that was the starting point in this whole analysis, saying essentially this. This is why the Rust incident happened. Can you see, before I say another word, can you see where my thought process is going? So in other words, the 552-page report comes out, and they can't say that the live rounds have come from PDQ proper norm. So if the live rounds didn't come from there, where else could they have come from? The other thing, just to give you a clue of what I'm talking about, is I played you the clip where there were these accidental discharges, and then you've heard that the producers rushed back to Sarge Rasmussen and said, please, can you come back and work for us? And then by then he was working for someone else. So if you take that and the possible other source of the live rounds, what do you think that possible other source is? And then where do you think that that takes us? Terry Dean, good to see you. Good to see you. Can you guys give me a moment? I just need to step away for a while. I just need to do something. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Timmy, come. Okay, well, what's going on? Timmy, I need you to get me back into focus here. I don't know why it does this sometimes. Maybe if I go back to full screen. Strange. Okay. Susan says, I'm half sleepy. Okay, I'll try and keep you, I don't want to say entertained, but I'll try and keep you interested by what we're talking about. So this is the part I want to bring to your attention. And that is simply highlighting from the New York Times article. Sheriff's report on rush shooting doesn't find the source of live rounds, right? And then basically that is a central question. That was the central question that Baldwin himself raised. You know, Estelle Pretorius, welcome. Thanks for joining us as a member. That was a central question that Baldwin himself raised kind of over and over again. How did a live round ... And so despite this 552-page report, they don't answer that question. In other words, they aren't able to link it to PDQ proper norm, right? And so that's kind of an area where you could say, where, although it can't be proven, where could that live round have come from, right? Where could that live round have come from? And I think the horrifying possible answer to that, we don't know this for a fact, but the horrifying possible answer to that is it could have actually been the armorer that brought a live round onto the set. In other words, the person whose job it was to prevent live rounds from coming onto the set brought the live round onto the set, right? Do you follow what I'm saying? It's the armorer's job to stop live rounds coming into the weapon, right? And so you could have live rounds coming in via, say, PDQ proper norm, or you could have live rounds coming in some other way. But for the armorer to actually bring live rounds onto the set is actually, it's kind of horrifying, right? It's kind of the last thing that you'd expect, right? You know what I'm saying? It's almost like, it's almost like the Koberger version of a PhD student in criminology commits a horrible crime. It's like kind of like the last person you'd expect it to be. Also in the Murdoch case, a lawyer, someone who's supposed to be very aware of the law, commits all sorts of breaks all sorts of laws, right? It's the same thing. The armorer it's like the hen guarding the, sorry, not the hen guarding the fox house, the fox guarding the hen house, right? Can you see how it's sort of really twisted the wrong way around, right? Okay, so the Times noted in its blurb and opening paragraphs the following. It was not determined where the, so let's go to that article. Let's just go to the beginning of it. Where is it? Right, this is from the New York Times. It was not determined where the live rounds on the set came from. And that was according to a spokesman with the sheriff's office. There it is. Right, it was not determined where the live rounds on the set came from. And that was based on just the response from the sheriff's office to the media, right? And so the question is, how did live ammunition make its way onto the set against the rules and into Alec Baldwin, into the gun Alec Baldwin was practicing with that day, right? So in a way, I'm revisiting an old question, but we're kind of going to revisit it in a little bit of a different way, right? So we want to address this question. Now, bear in mind the title of this episode. This is why the Rust incident happened, right? And now, are we going to try and answer that question by answering what the 552-page report didn't answer and couldn't answer, right? And it's got to do with the route that this live ammunition took, and it's also got to do with the armorer. So we're narrowing our focus to that. That's why I say, let's not talk about Alec Baldwin is guilty or what happened in the church. We actually want to talk about the rippling effect sort of coming together into an inevitable conclusion from the outside. And that's a story that you haven't really heard about in terms of this case. Okay, so not to put too fine a point on it, but where the live round came from and how the live round made its way onto the set and into the gun and why that happened are three separate questions, right? Let me say that again. When you think about where the live round came from, that's a where question. How the live round made its way onto the set, that's a how question. And why that happened, that is the third question, that's a why question. And look at the title of this episode, it's why, right? Why did it happen? But these are three separate questions. So in this analysis, we'll try to determine the answers to all three questions, but specifically the why. So first, let's try and get a little perspective. Now, I chose this image. It's, can you guys see that? Let me put it full screen. So I chose this image for a reason. So what I want to do is do a little bit of a demonstration about perspective. So if you're thinking about a legal case and true crime, you've got to have the right perspective. You've got to have the right vantage point, right? So if you just look at this image, would you say we've got the right perspective here, right? So I've chosen this image of the Bonanza Creek Ranch where the Rust set was located because most of us haven't seen it before. Have you seen this image before? You can see there's a little bit of snow on the ground. You can see at the bottom over here, you can see is the entrance to the ranch set, right? You can see there's sort of a water tower over here and all sorts of buildings and so on. There's a windmill over there, right? Can you locate the wooden church in this image? Look carefully. I'll sort of scroll a little bit up, right? Can you locate the wooden church in this image? If you can, tell me where you see it. You want me to go a little bit more to the right? There's a windmill there as well. Can you see the wooden church in this image? And it's not behind me, so don't worry about that, right? Do you see the wooden church in this image? Songbird says, is it way in the back? I think Songbird thinks that might be the wooden church. Do you think that's the wooden church? Does that look like the wooden church? You think that's the wooden church, or is perhaps that the wooden church? Status Quo says the topmost building. Topmost building? Where's the topmost building? Right? Sinan says second from bottom right. Bottom right, second from bottom right. Is it somewhere here? Sharon says left, left, left. Okay. Do you see it somewhere here? That's as far left as I can go. Halyna says, I thought the church was very tall. Terry says left, center, top. Okay, let's go to the top. And here's so you're saying that's the church. Does that look like a church? Brittany Gray says middle top. Yvonne, don't give the game away. So you can't actually see the church in this image because it's not in this image, right? Because it's cropped out. So the church actually isn't even in this image, right? Right? The church is not in this image. It is in this image, which is zoomed out just a little bit more, right? Now tell me if you can see the church in this image. Can you see the church? Where's the church in that image? Anyone able to see the church in that image? Okay, so it's right over here, although you would be forgiven for saying where's the steeple, and it does look a little bit different, but there are those signature 3 windows. It does look a bit different, but that is the church. That's where the church is located. And if you paid a lot of attention to the body cam, you would have noticed this windmill in this area and this thing over here, and this is where the helicopter landed as well, and all that kind of thing. But that's where the church was located. It's on this side of it, right? So the reason why I've showed you that is if you compare this image to the other image, there's a slight better bit of extra perspective, right? In other words, you want to be able to see something from the right perspective. And how do you know if you're seeing something from the right perspective? Only when you've got a lot of information that you're able to say, you know what, I'm not seeing what I think I'm supposed to be seeing, right? So it also helps to be told that the thing you're looking for isn't in a certain set of information, doesn't it? Right? So if I was saying to you, find the church in an image, but I know it's not there, it's kind of a bit mischievous of me. And the same applies to a defendant. You're supposed to hand over what you know. Well, do you think they're going to be doing that? Do you think if Baldwin has certain information on his phone, do you think he's going to be handing it over, right? but really in any case, do you think someone's going to be wanting to give you the exact right perspective, or do you need to figure that out, right? Okay, so it would be cynical and more than a little mischievous to say the search for the church while knowing all along it's not there, right? And that then brings us to this question of where, right? Where did the live round come from? So I've just kind of done a little mind job on you just to make you think about what you don't know, right? Like be aware that based on everything you know about this case, maybe there's a certain amount that you don't know, right? And now let's think about that in terms of where did this live round come from? And part of that we don't know is this thing of, for as long as this case has gone on, we've thought, well, the live round must have come from PDQ, prop and arm somehow. But that's not the answer. And that is a little bit like looking at this image with the church cropped out of it. There's a little bit of extra perspective that we're not getting, right? Do you follow my point? So it's tempting to imagine that the live round that killed Halyna Hutchins came from PDQ prop and arm, right? Arm and prop. And I think Baldwin himself may have believed that. And I think maybe he's pushed that narrative in his cross complaint. But whether it can be proven is another matter. And we know Seth Kenny, the ammunition supplier, hasn't been charged, right? So I think you kind of, Robbie, thanks a lot for that. Is it Robbie or Rob? Thanks a lot for that. I think you've kind of got to ask the question, can they not prove that PDQ arm and prop, that the round came from there? Can they not prove it? Or can they not prove it because it didn't happen? And that's totally two different questions. The one is, it did come from PDQ arm and prop, but they just can't prove it. And the other one is, it didn't come from PDQ arm and prop. And that's a totally different perspective. But the bottom line is they have charged ALEC Baldwin and they've charged the armorer, right? Is there a clue in that? So the Times examines this question in further detail in its article from November 18, noting, according to the investigation records, live ammunition was also found on top of a cart used by the prop department, in a bandolier on the cart, and in an ammunition box. All of it was listed as having been manufactured by Starline Brass, a company that does not make live ammunition. That's a huge clue. So all of the live ammunition that was found on the set was listed as being manufactured by Starline Brass, a company that doesn't even make live ammunition. Can you see how that suddenly changes your perspective? So who might be involved in making live bullets essentially from scratch? Who might be involved in making live bullets essentially from scratch? In other words, you're getting dummy rounds, but you make live rounds out of those dummy rounds. Who do you think would be someone who could do that? Do you think an actor would do that? Do you think sort of a normal Joe Blow would do something like that? If you're on Patreon and you know the answer, please don't answer. Where the wind blows, says my son does. But the point is, someone with some knowledge about this kind of thing, not kind of an amateur, right? Not sort of a. I don't think people would generally know that, right? So let me ask that again. Who would know how to build bullets except someone who is around bullets an awful lot? Do you agree with that? And that statement, just saying that, reminds me of a scene in the movie Backdraft where someone says, how does it go? Who doesn't love fire and is around trictichlorate all day long, right? And we've been talking about this idea of the fox guarding the hen house. Well, who doesn't love fire and is around trictichlorate all day long? Well, a fireman. So the same thing. Who is around bullets all day and knows how to build up bullets? Well, how about an armorer? Also, how about the armorer's dad, right? And so maybe I can play this little quote from Backdraft. See if you can hear it.
Do you have an old PC lying around?
No, that's not what I wanted to play. Let's just get through that ad. I just want to play this so you can get my drift.
They won't let him have any fun, so they don't love him. Now, who doesn't love fire and is around trictichlorate all day long?
So that was Donald Sutherland, and I don't know if you heard what he said. Who doesn't love fire and is around trictichlorate all day long? And the plot in Backdraft was actually that a fireman was setting fires to allow other people to collect insurance, right? In other words, a fireman setting fires, but also knowing how to set them so that they sort of limit themselves, right? In other words, someone who doesn't love fire, starting fires and whatever, right? And so you kind of have that same sort of thing, possibly in this case. So who doesn't love live bullets and is around Starline Brass cases all day, right? Well, how about the armorer's dad? And here's a picture of him. Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense, kind of what we're saying? So, and if you look down here, look at all those weapons. Now, in the same way that the image of Bonanza Creek we looked at earlier, looking for the church, was incomplete, so too, I imagine, is this idea of rust and PDQ, PDQ and rust. Now, if we go back to the New York Times article, in a newly released 2021 interview, that's from the New York Times article, Sarah Zachary, the crew member in charge of props on set, said the film had sourced its dummy rounds, inert cartridges that cannot be fired, and are used to resemble live bullets on film from Mr. Kenny and another individual referred to as Billy Ray. Okay, so that's the part we know. That's the cropped image. We know that part. Now, if we zoom back to get a bit of additional perspective, what's the part that we don't know? Well, how about this? Zachary said that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed had also brought with her gun belts with dummy rounds, right? Gun belts with dummy rounds already loaded in them, as well as a green bin from a prior production. Now, someone asked right at the beginning of this chat, somebody asked, how on earth did a live round get into Alec Baldwin's gun belt? How did a live round get into the bandolier? Well, there's a potential answer to that question, right? I'm not saying it is the answer. I'm saying it's a potential answer. And it's from the New York Times. Sarah Zachary said that Hannah had brought with her gun belts with rounds already loaded into them from a prior production. So that's coming onto the set via parallel stream to PDQ arm and prop. Do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, you're getting props and you're getting dummy rounds coming onto the Rust set, not via the distribution channel of PDQ prop and arm and prop, but via Hannah. There you have it in black and white, right? It's all supposed to come through a specific stream, and that way it's checked on the one end and it's checked on the other end. but someone bringing it in via another stream, who's going to be checking that? Do you think the person who's bringing it in is checking their own things? You would imagine, but it's not supposed to happen like that in the first place. So that is a good question. Did she preload the belts at home? Well, they were preloaded somewhere. And I think the important point is not on the Rust set. Okay. So the article goes on to say, witnesses have presented the sheriff's office with several possibilities for how live rounds may have ended on the set, right? So the bottom line is we don't know what the answer is, right? That's the bottom line. So no matter what we say, first of all, we can't prove it. And second of all, even if we are quite sure of ourselves, we can't be certain of it, right? What we can do is we can look at what the people on the set thought is the answer to that question. Do you agree that that is also going to bring us back and give us a stronger perspective from what we thought we knew, right? Okay, so let's have a look at that. So in terms of these several possibilities, one came in a note to investigators from Thel Reed, right? Do you know what that's sort of referring to? One possibility for how live rounds came onto the set came via a note that Thel Reed, I presume, wrote. I presume it's like a handwritten note. Who's Thel Reed? It is Hannah's dad. So Hannah's dad basically says, hi, I think I know how live rounds may have come onto the set. But you, the armorer's dad. Yeah. Okay, so what is your idea? So he says, well, he's a prominent Hollywood armorer. He trained Hannah, and he said that he'd wrote them a month or two before the Rush shooting. It wrote to Seth Kenny, right? And he and Mr. Kenny trained actors on a different set at a gun range with live ammunition. Do you feel like the perspective has just shifted backwards slightly? Do you get a sense, whoa, the perspective has just shifted slightly here? In other words, he's saying, guess what? I was firing live ammunition with Seth Kenny. And then I guess the next thought would be, did Seth Kenny take the live ammunition? I think another possibility there is, well, did you take Hannah along with you as well? I think that's another thing that you could ask. Or if you tended to shoot live rounds, did Hannah sometimes go and do that as well when it suited her, right? But anyway, you kind of have Hannah's father volunteering and saying, you know what, we actually went and shot live rounds before this anyway. And then you say, well, Hannah actually brought holsters that were preloaded. She brought stuff with her from another production from somewhere else. Well, how do you know what is live and what's not when that's going on in the background? How would she know? Anyway, he says, after the training, Mr. Kenny kept the live rounds and took them back home with him, later telling Mr. Reed that he wanted to keep the rounds. So you kind of get the idea from this explanation that Hannah's dad is saying it's Seth Kenny. Seth Kenny is the man, right? But of course, it's also Hannah's father saying this, right? And so couldn't you have had a situation where, hypothetically, Hannah's dad goes to a shooting range and then he comes home and he brings home live rounds? Or Hannah and her dad and some other dude go and they shoot, and then either Hannah brings home a live round or her dad brings home a live round. That's another possibility. Violet, good to see you. So this seems to suggest Kenny got the live rounds from Hannah's father, but once again, it makes PDQ out to be the source of live rounds. Well, PDQ via Hannah's father. Do you see that? So it's like Hannah's father is saying, you know what, PDQ, the live rounds come from PDQ, but he's also saying, well, PDQ via me. The live rounds came from me, and then they went to PDQ, right? You see that? So why not Hannah's father to Hannah, but not via PDQ? I mean, don't you kind of get the sense that a father's protecting his daughter? And maybe what he's saying is true, but doesn't one get that sense? Thanks a lot, Robbie. Okay. So the Times notes that Hannah has blamed Kenny for being the source of the live rounds, and Kenny has blamed Hannah. So there you kind of have it in black and white. Kenny blames Hannah, Hannah blames Kenny. And I suppose you could ask the question, who is the more professional between Kenny or Hannah? I don't know if it's necessarily that simple or easy to answer, but if you had to make a bet, if someone said yes, $10,000, who would you bet could have made this mistake, or who do you think could be more likely to have made this mistake? If you've got to choose between the one and the other, what do you think you might say? Anyway, let's read it. In statements and legal papers, Ms. Gutierrez-Reed has laid blame on Mr. Kenny. In a lawsuit she filed against him, lawyers for Ms. Gutierrez-Reed said the ammunition that Seth Kenny's company supplied contained a mix of dummy and live ammunition. Now, how does she know that? How does she know that it contained? Surely, if she knew that, she would have told someone. Surely, if she knew that, she would have told Seth. She would have sent him a message saying, "Fuck, dude, there's a live round that you sent through." Does she ever do that? Does she ever say that? In a statement to the news media and in an interview, Mr. Kenny has pinned the blame on Gutierrez-Reed, saying that the handling of firearms and ammunition on set was her responsibility. So let's zoom out a little bit more for some additional context on this. And we're still dealing with this article from the New York Times. Right? So a detective, this is quoting from the New York Times, a detective also questioned Gutierrez-Reed about dummy rounds that she had brought from a recent film on which she was an armorer, a Western called The Old Way, starring Nicolas Cage. So remember what I said earlier, Hannah brought ammunition separately onto the Rust set. In other words, Hannah had access to ammunition separate from the Rust set. And maybe she thought it's normal for that to be the case. It's normal for an armorer to have some ammo at home and some ammo in the car and some ammo on the set, right? But you would imagine a professional armorer would basically kind of have a situation where the only ammunition that he touches is on the set. You know what I mean? There's no fluidity kind of going on. In other words, the set is a sealed, it's a sealed venue, if I can put it that way, right? Do you see what I'm saying? You isolate that venue, and there's no way that things can kind of get on, right? You're still going to check everything, but you make sure that there's no little side distribution channels for this. And with Hannah, you can kind of imagine she's grown up with bullets here, bullets there, bullets everywhere. And now she's supposed to have an organized system herself, but does she? That maybe she just assumes, well, if I shake the round, I'll know. But what about having systems in place to make sure that the rounds that you are dealing with come from someone else who's also checked them? So you have that double check in place. Anyway, it says here, Ms. Gutierrez-Reed told investigators that at one point during her work on Rust, she noticed a shortage of .45 long Colt dummy rounds. This is really important. I think I'm going to take myself out of this. It's this paragraph here. So at one point, she realizes there's a shortage of .45 long Colt dummy rounds. Now guess what those rounds are. Those are the rounds from the gun that killed Halyna. So she notices that there's specifically a shortage for .45 long Colt dummy rounds. So she asks Kenny where she could find some more of those, right? So it's actually documented that Hannah kind of contacts Seth and says, where can I get some more .45 long Colt dummy rounds? And he says that you must check the supply of dummy rounds from the old way, which I guess is rounds that she already had. In doing so, she found a bag filled with a bunch of loose dummies in her car. And you can see I've highlighted that. Hannah is basically looking for certain rounds, can't find them, and ultimately finds some in her car. That's the short story. It's like, I'm trying to find a special kind of dummy round or a special kind of bullet. I can't find it. Seth basically says, well, just look, and then she finds it in her car. That's the source for the rounds that she's trying to find, her car. It's lying around in her car. She finds a bag filled with a bunch of loose dummies in her car. And then she says, but I checked to make sure that all the rounds were dummies. Either you did or you didn't. But that's definitely another way a live round could have come onto the set. That you ended up with a bag of bullets, like there they are mixed together. So think about her lawsuit. Her lawsuit is accusing Kenny of supplying like a mixture of live and dummy rounds. Well, yeah, you have a bag. It's not even like it's in a box. You've got a bag of bullets. And she says, oh, yes, I checked to make sure all the rounds are dummies, like you checked before handing the gun over to Baldwin. Like you checked that. Did you check it the same way? Did you know that? Did you know that Hannah got bullets, dummies, from her own car? Not from PDQ, not from the Rust stores, from her car. Did you know that? So now that's just an example of we've extended that perspective, because knowing that is important so that you know, oh, this is actually part of the full story, right? So she made sure all the rounds were dummies, just as I say, she made sure that she just loaded, on the day of the incident, that those were filled with dummies as well. Now, let me ask that question again. Now, who doesn't love live bullets and is around Starline Brass cases all day? Is random leftovers. Who doesn't love live bullets? Answer, armorer, but who's also around Starline Brass cases all day? Well, how about the armorer's dad's daughter? How about that as the answer to that question? And now we're going to zoom out a little bit further, right? Now we're going out of this New York Times article, and we're going to item 69. You can see I've done a bit of research. From Baldwin's cross complaint, it provides a little bit of further insight into this. Can you guys see that? Shall I make it a bit bigger? Can you guys read that? Zachary knew about Gutierrez-Reed misplacing things and mixing them up. Do I need to read any further? So according to what Baldwin says, that Sarah Zachary said, and Sarah was essentially Hannah's co-worker, essentially Hannah's assistant in a way, essentially Hannah's colleague, essentially someone who worked side by side with her. She said, you know what, I knew about Hannah misplacing things and mixing them up. So then you say, how does a live round end up getting on set? Well, how about somebody who mixes things up and is working with bullets all the time? And according to this point, as far as Baldwin is aware, Sarah made no complaints to the production company or others on this. And you can see what he's trying to do is put the blame on Sarah. Sarah, it's your fault that this happened. You should have reported it. But the point is, look who was making the mistake in the first place. Crew members have since reported that Gutierrez-Reed took the prop guns to a shooting range. Did you know that? Right? This is coming from crew members, and I think one of them said that it was the prop truck driver was, I think, becoming pals with Hannah, and I think he's kind of got a beard. You see him in some of the photos on the body cam. I think that's him. And then they did live ammunition and they did target practice. Did you know that? So in the middle of the Rush production, Hannah is going off with a Colt 45, with the gun that killed Halyna. She's going and she's shooting with live ammunition. So you say, how on earth could a live round? Well, what do you think you were doing during the production? I was shooting with live rounds with the gun that killed Halyna. So can you read this email? It says, from Weston Brownlee to Sarah Zachary, and it says, can you read what it says there? Hey, you may know this and it's hearsay, but I'm telling you this because it's info you should have, especially given the investigation. I just heard from someone claiming they know the driver of your prop truck. So from someone else claiming that they know the driver of your prop truck, that the armorer allegedly went out target shooting last night with the gun ALEC had and then fired. There's your box of rounds. You said you don't know where they came from. Given what you told me about the armorer misplacing things, there's a further reinforcement for that, and mixing them up, further reinforcement for that. There's the live rounds right there. I would disclose that to the police if that's not info you already knew. But there's a very important insight to come from this, and that's the date over there. Can you see where my cursor is? This email was sent on the 21st of the 10th, which is the day of the shooting. So if the armorer went out target shooting last night, that was the day before the shooting. If the email was sent 21st of October and the armorer went shooting last night with a pal, then it means the night before Halyna died, the armorer took the gun that Alex would later use, and she went shooting target practice with live rounds the day before. So when you see that, do you kind of get a sense that it's really this incredible mystery? It's like, this is such a difficult, where did a live round come from? It's really hard for me to kind of figure that out. So as I say, this email was sent on the same day Halyna was shot. So it's not like somebody had a sudden burst of inspiration. It was sent the same day when their memory was still fresh about what had happened hours earlier, like the night before. What did Hannah do on her off time? As soon as they wrapped, what did she go and do? And it's sent to someone. It's not like information that's just sort of floating around. It's sent to Sarah Zachary. Right? Hannah went target shooting last night with Alex's gun, means the night before Halyna's death. The night before Halyna's death, Hannah was shooting live rounds. and then apparently going out for drinks afterwards. That's the other part. You go and shoot live rounds with that gun, and then you go out for drinks after that. And then maybe you stay out quite late, and then the next morning you arrive on set bleary-eyed, and then there's not a safety briefing. Yes, I did say that. I did say that. Or that's what this email says. Okay, and so here's another one. This is also from the cross complaint, right? It has also been discovered that Zachary harbored serious reservations regarding Gutierrez-Reed's performance, including regarding her alcohol use away from set. Zachary did not air these concerns until after the fatal shooting. So what you have there, what appears to be, is that there's some kind of substance abuse alleged, right? And it's to do with use away from the set, right? And so here it is. This is dated the 25th of October, so 4 days after the incident, from Sarah Zachary to Seth Kenny. I think she was so drunk that she didn't know she brought live ammunition onto the truck when she went to go get a gun from the safe. In other words, what's being alleged here, what Sarah is thinking, is that Hannah came onto set drunk and hungover from the night before, right? She says, I think she was so drunk that she didn't know she brought live ammunition onto the truck. In other words, the next morning she was still, under the influence to some extent. That's what she suspects. And then over here, this is the 25th, sent a few minutes before that. I told you Hannah was blackout drunk last weekend, right? That's also from Sarah to Seth. Again, do you get a sense that maybe your perspective is shifting to a slightly broader perspective? Okay. So when Hannah ran out of her .45 long Colt dummy rounds and she headed to the trunk of her vehicle, she may have lost track of the fact that some of those rounds were live, or that she'd left a live round in the gun from the previous night's fun and games. We know that she said that she checked, but that's just taking what she says at face value, right? What I'm trying to say is the way that a live round could have gotten into the gun is that there was still a live round in the gun already, right? So the one way is that she'd loaded it with live rounds the night before, right? And it could be that she just got mixed up when maybe the next day either she didn't unload them all, or she took the live rounds out, but then lost track of where the live rounds were and where the other rounds were, right? So obviously this is a theory, but it's one potential explanation for where the live round came from. Not necessarily from PDQ and not directly from the Rust set either, but from Hannah's vehicle and from her hijinks offset. So to conclude, so we've started this, we're going to deal with the next question now, but we started this whole thing around the question, where did the live round come from? And the answer that I'm suggesting as fairly likely, we don't know if it's probable or possible, but is that it may actually have come from Hannah's car. That could be the answer. And so a shorter version of that answer, if you say, well, the live round came from Hannah's car, the shorter version of that answer could be from Hannah, from Hannah, right? I'm just saying that's one possibility based on what you've just argued. Thanks a lot, precisely me. Okay, so now we go on to how, right? We've spoken about where it came from. Now let's talk about how. So now it's how did the live round end up in the gun, right? How did that happen? So in the LA Times, it's an article dated January 28th, 2022, almost a year ago, just titled, "In Email Exchange Before Shooting, Rust Armorer Said She Needed to Focus on Weapons, Not Props." So this article. So again, what you're trying to do is get a bigger perspective than the one we originally had. And so when we say, how did this happen? We're not really saying, how did Hannah put the bullet into the gun? We're saying, how did this whole situation that Hannah is even working on this movie happen? Right? In other words, we're saying, on a much bigger sort of canvas, we're saying, how did this situation actually even, how was it even allowed to come into being in the first place, right? So in other words, we're kind of moving away from Hannah now. We've sort of seen, while there were problems with Hannah, and we've seen right in the beginning that the producers seemed to get spooked by what happened, but how did they end up hiring Hannah in the first place? Right? How did they end up hiring Hannah in the first place? And you get a fascinating narrative, a fascinating perspective from this article, right? Where the armorer said she needed to focus on weapons, not props. And so if you had feelings of animus towards Hannah, this gives you an idea that Hannah was saying the right thing. Guys, I need to be able to focus on what I'm doing. Yes, Hannah, you do. Hannah, you do need to focus on what you're doing. But then what do her managers tell her? She's saying, hi, do you mind if I focus more on the weapons? What do you think their answer is? Do you think their answer is, yes, we want you to focus more on safety, on the weapons? Do you think that's the answer? So this now sheds more light on the question of how. Not quite sure. Yeah, so there's part of the answer. Can you guys see that? We hired you as both armorer and key assistant props, Gabriel Pickle wrote in the October 14 email. It's been brought to my attention that you are focusing far more on armor and not supporting props as needed. What do you think the message there is? Focus less of your time and attention on the weapon stuff. It's fine. Focus less on the weapons. Rick, I didn't think it was that good. If you don't know much about the case, then I think it's not bad, but I don't know if you really got a lot of insight from that. That was my personal feeling. Anyway, so Gutierrez-Reed told sheriff's detectives that she checked Baldwin's gun that day before the unscheduled rehearsal, but she didn't really check it too much. Those are her own words. In other words, she's saying, you know what, I did check the Colt .45 that I gave to ALEC, but not really that much. I didn't check it too much. I didn't check it too much. That's quite a admission. You know, someone's dead. Did you check? Did you make sure? I didn't really check it too much, to be honest. I didn't really check it too much. And then this is the part that's important. She complained to deputies, and I think that's Sarah Zachary, that she was stretched too thin performing her props role and was unaware that a rehearsal was taking place. She complained that she was being stretched too thin. So I think it's fair to say that Hannah wasn't like an angel. She wasn't like perfect, put it that way. But I think the other side is the environment she was in wasn't perfect either. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, she was complaining that she didn't know there was a rehearsal. Now, if you think about that, you didn't know there was a rehearsal and you'd been firing live rounds the night before and you were a bit slow to do whatever. Maybe you just ran and gave the gun to ALEC. Well, the last time you used it, it was with live rounds. And then I think you can also ask the question, was there really just one live round in that gun, or were they all live rounds? Just think about that. Imagine if all the rounds in that gun were live rounds, but Hannah just forgot about it. So it's not as though the production managers were unaware of Hannah's shortcomings or difficulties. And all of this comes from this LA Times article. So I think one's got to move away, and bear in mind Hannah is a defendant in this case. I think one's got to say, okay, she's a defendant. What about the other side of the story? Like, did people just not notice what was going on with Hannah, or did they not care, or both? What's really going on here? So according to the LA Times, on October 14, so that's a week before the incident, the film's line producer, Gabriel Pickle, scolded Gutierrez-Reed in an email reviewed by the LA Times. In other words, it's kind of a disciplinary thing. And as you heard at the beginning of this, there were sufficient concerns about Hannah that they actually tried to replace her, and then they found that they couldn't. And this supports that, the fact that she was actually scolded in an email. So there's a date for that email, right? And we know that when they contacted Sarge Rasmussen, it was before the incident. So there was time to get somebody else before the incident, and then Rasmussen by then wasn't available anymore. Gaylor says everyone assumed the step before them had been done right, so no one had checked again. That's true. So according to this email, she said that the production office had received complaints that 2 shotguns had been left unattended on the set. And also she took Gutierrez to task for not doing enough to support Sarah Zachary. So Hannah's been criticized in 2 ways. She's been criticized for a safety violation. Shotguns are lying around, and you're not doing your job on the other side, right? You're not doing your job just in terms of your prop work, ordinary prop work. You can imagine cowboy movies just filled with props and costumes, right? It's just filled with them. So the fact that 2 shotguns are left unattended on set, and Gabriel Pickle complains about this, doesn't that tell you that the Rust crew, the Rust production, was sort of aware that certain things weren't going according to plan? That's besides trying to get Sarge Rasmussen into the production. That's besides that. And then this is what she wrote in this October 14 email. These are her words. She said, "We hired you as both armor and key assistant props." And remember the title of the poll that I've got up. What's the reason why this happened? Just remember what's in that poll. So she says, "We hired you as both armor and key assistant props." And I think you could pose the question, if they'd only hired her as an armorer, would this still have happened? I would tend to, I don't know what you guys think. Do you think if they only hired Hannah as an armorer, do you think that would have prevented this from taking place? What do you guys say to that? Yeah, that is on paper. That's in an email. That's well established. Sinan says, I don't think it would have happened. I think it would have. I think if they just hired her as an armorer, it would still have happened. I don't think it helped that they had her working in this other role as well. I don't think it helped, but I think this would still have happened. It's my personal opinion. The flip side to that is if they had hired just an armorer, then they probably would have gotten Sarge in the first place. They would have gotten a different armorer in the first place. I agree with you, Marcus. You see what I'm saying? If they only hired an armorer, then they would have gotten Sarge, and that probably would have made all of the difference. So why did they not just hire Sarge? What's the simple answer to that? Why have an armorer who's an armorer and props? What's going on there? What do you think the motivation is combining those roles and getting a inexperienced person who's 24 years old? So in that email, she said, it has been brought to my attention that you are focusing far more on armor and not supporting props as needed. That's coming from basically her employer. Yeah, cutting costs. That's it. And that's, to me, that's what I would have voted in the poll. Cutting costs. It's not a very sexy reason, but I think it is what we're talking about. So she says, it's been brought to my attention you're focusing far more on armor and not supporting props as needed. And then this was her response. And then she said, this was Hannah's response. She said, since we've started, I've had a lot of days where my job should only be to focus on the guns and everyone's safety. That was how Hannah responded via email to that criticism. She's basically saying, I really need to focus 100% on this. She then said, on the gun-heavy days during filming, the assistant props role has to take a back seat. Live firearms on set is absolutely my priority. And all of that reflects, certainly in terms of words, reflects very well on Hannah. She's saying the right things, right? And I think at the same time, it doesn't reflect very well on the production. She's trying to say to them, I need to make the weapon side my priority. And then you've had these incidents as well. And then she says, when I'm forced to do both jobs, this is like so portentous. She says, when I am forced to do both jobs, she's basically saying, when you force me to do all of this, that's when mistakes happen. And that's exactly what did happen. And then I think you can ask the question, was she being forced to do both jobs? Yes, of course she was. Yeah, coming to work hungover isn't good either. That's true. That's the other side of that. So another aspect to the how, let me just put this up. Another aspect to the how is, how did the Rush producers find out about Hannah, right? And this is where it gets really, what's the word? It gets really convoluted. The plot thickens. So you say, how did they find out about Rush? How did they find out about Hannah to begin with? Like she's not part of the ebb and flow of crew. Like, who dropped her name? How did Hannah come onto Rust's radar to begin with? Anybody know? Anybody know how Rust found out about Hannah to begin with? Erica says dad's connections. Good guess, but it's not that. Run the World says it's an incestuous business. Anyone know how Hannah came onto Rust's radar? Not her dad, no. There you go. Seth. So Seth Kenny knew that there was this production going to take place, and he knew that he stood to benefit from it. But obviously, if they can't get an armorer, then he's not going to be part of the whole thing. So guess what he did? He facilitated, he recommended, he endorsed, he made it happen that Hannah was hired. He basically said, hey, I know an armorer that you could use. Kind of ironic, isn't it? So he recommended her because, first of all, he knew her father, and obviously Kenny wanted the job as prop supplier. By putting forward Hannah's name and endorsing her, he was also facilitating his own role on the production. So in other words, there's a carrot for Kenny if Rust took on Hannah, if that makes sense. Kenny benefits if Hannah gets the job, right? But then you've also got to ask the question, did Kenny really think that Hannah deserved the job? Or did Kenny really think that Hannah should have the job? Or was Kenny thinking, I want to be the supplier here. I want the business here. Cybersu says, it just gets worse the more you know. That's for sure. So interestingly, there's a confusing period where it appeared Kenny was part of the Rust production as an armorer mentor. Did you know about that? There's kind of a confusing part of the narrative where Kenny seems to be acknowledged or referred to or whatever as the armorer mentor. And so you almost get the idea that he said, I know someone you could hire, and if you've got any concerns about her, don't worry, I will mentor her, right? She is quite young, whatever. And in other words, that was being suggested. But if you look at this article, here, it says Hannah Gutierrez-Reed wasn't the only weapons expert working on Rust, who was the armorer mentor, right? And that's also from the LA Times. But look at what is on the sidebar here. It says, for the record, December 2nd, 2021, which I think was just around the time ALEC Baldwin did his interview. Rust gun expert, 11 days after publication of this article, Seth Kenny provided a written statement denying that he was the armorer mentor on the Rust film production and claiming that the Rust production company erroneously listed him on a crew list as the armorer mentor. So in other words, on the Rust crew list, Seth Kenny's name is there as the armorer mentor. And he's saying that was an error. I was never the armorer mentor, right? And so you kind of get the idea, was that how Hannah ended up getting the job? Was that Seth said, don't worry, I'll mentor her. You know, maybe the Rust producers said, you know what, we're really a little bit worried. We're really not sure about this. And didn't Seth Kenny say, don't worry, I'll look after her? Don't you get that idea, that impression? Gaylor says, thanks, Gaylor says, if the bullet supplier mixed in some live round boxes, or if she brought some for target practice, somehow she assumed none of it around in the wrong places. She obviously lost track either way, right? She obviously lost track either way. That's what it looks like. So Sarah says, sounds like he vouched for her, then threw her under the bus. It does, doesn't it? I like your dog. Dover says, what is an armorer mentor? It's someone who provides mentorship, someone who provides takes someone under their wing. And in other words, they provide mentoring, they provide advice, they provide counsel. Right? That's really, but bear in mind, he's not even on the set. So it's like, does he provide that counsel via email? Does he provide it via text? Right? Okay. So when the shit hit the fan, it was clarified that no such position existed. Just think about that. Hannah gets this job. She doesn't seem like the perfect candidate, but what seems to streamline the whole process is maybe the armorer mentor thing. But then when the shit hits the fan, no, there was no armorer mentor thing going on. And then you sort of think, was there some kind of unofficial thing going on the Rust set? Was there some sort of unofficial system taking place? Well, if you consider the whole cost-cutting thing, then isn't that the unwritten thing that's going on? Okay, so now we're going to deal with why. So I basically provided you with a context in order to deliver this question. I mean, it's a question that we've been asking for a long time, and I want to answer that question, or try and answer that question, but with hopefully a lot more perspective than we've ever had prior to this, right? So it's this question of why over here. So having sketched this out, so I've given you the Hannah perspective, and I've given you in other words, where the live round came from, shooting the day before, maybe drinking, getting a bag of bullets from the car. That's the where. And then I've spoken about the how, where you see how they combined the roles, and there was this pressure on her to do two roles, and then there was this weird armorer mentor thing that wasn't really real. And then there was also kind of the production side making all sorts of demands, right? That's the how aspect, and now we're going to deal with the why aspect. Why did this incident happen? So ostensibly, the fundamental questions are: who loaded the live round? If you think about it, what are the fundamental questions we've been asking since this happened? Well, they are: who loaded the live round and where did it come from? And these are the questions Baldwin himself has repeatedly framed as fundamental. I hope you guys are following me with this. If you weren't paying attention, now is a really good time to pay attention. Let me say this again. Ostensibly, in other words, explicitly, one has the sense that the fundamental questions are: who loaded the live round and where did it come from, right? But that's not the critical question. That's not the critical question. It's been framed. You've been told this is the critical question. But the critical question is actually why, right? So Baldwin himself has repeatedly framed those questions as fundamental, but fundamentally, the real question is: why did this happen, right? It's the same question we have all over true crime. Why did he commit this crime? What was the motive in the Alex Murdoch case? What is the motive in the Idaho case? Why, right? And the same question needs to be asked here: not who, not where, why. Do you see that? And as soon as you ask why, you have a totally different perspective. And if you keep asking the question why, you will have a question like this. You'll have these questions. Why was the armorer hired in the first place? Why was the armorer that was hired in the first place? It's a why question, right? Now let's ask another why question. Why was the uncertainty about rounds and where they came from in the first place? Why would there be uncertainty about where the rounds came from in the first place? Why wouldn't you just say it must have come from PDQ? It couldn't have come from anywhere else. It's another why question. And then another one, and this is a trickier question. Oh, sorry, I misread that. Although the why is a trickier question, it's not nearly as tricky to answer as it seems to be to ask, right? In other words, why has it been such a long road to just asking why? Why is it's a trickier question, but the real question is, why has it taken so long to ask why? And so in a series of brilliant investigative pieces by the LA Times, you kind of get the answer to that. It's not like it's hidden away. You simply need to just do your research. So here is the LA Times dated November 20th, so just a month after the incident. And it's titled, it was supposed to be their big break. Now 2 24-year-olds are at the center of the Rush shooting investigation. Excellent article. And it's about Hannah and Sarah. It's a really in-depth article, and I covered some of the investigative reporting in my 90+ deep dives into this case, right? There's a link to that article. So from November 20th, less than a month after the incident, we get our answer. We are in a bind. This is from this article. We are in a bind and we need someone to start in props immediately. And that's what Gabrielle Pickle wrote to Rasmussen, according to a copy of that email that was viewed by the Times. Paddy Dunn's actually in the middle of like a bullet zone, is going into Ukraine. Good to see you, Paddy. I hope you stay safe. Would love to actually interview you, but you just need to figure out, you need to get a teenager to show you how to use StreamYard. Anyway, so can you see what's going on there? They were trying to get the production up and running, and when they looked again, they just couldn't find an armorer, right? They were trying to hire armorers, but they just couldn't find any, right? And so they're saying, you know what, we are in a situation, it's kind of an emergency, we need to hire somebody. And so they wrote to Rasmussen, we know now what happened. They first got him, they secured him, and then they kind of had second thoughts and they decided maybe we've got a better offer. Reminds me of the 96 Everest disaster, which started with, I think it was Mountain Madness approached John Krakauer to write an article in Outside Magazine. And at the last minute, Krakauer, I think, went to Adventure Consultants and he said, hey, you want me to go with you? And then he went to them, and that led to the whole thing taking place. That simple strategic shift changed everything. It seems like this strategic shift also changed everything, doesn't it? So this is the same Gabrielle Pickle who was giving Hannah a hard time about focusing more on props than on arms. And Pickle was also the same line producer who told Hannah no more training days for ALEC. And she's also been called to testify against Baldwin, looks like. So when she said no more training days for ALEC, she meant no more weapons training. And that was something that was actually brought up in the probable cause affidavit, I think, to say why Baldwin was basically being charged was because he didn't get enough training. So there's a reckless aspect to that. So you kind of got to also ask the question, if someone said no more training days for ALEC, whose idea was that? Was that Gabrielle Pickle's idea? So if you look at this series of texts, it is a bit hard to read, but it does show. Hannah says, these show the training days I kept trying to get and maintenance days. The nice producer, I think that should be line producer, specifically said no more training days for ALEC. Then Hannah replied, the line producer, yeah. So if there was a rush during the production of Rust, and I made a video saying it wasn't Rust, it was Rush. The untold story was the rush during the pre-production phase, right? I've been talking to you guys about expanding your perspective. Well, there was the perspective that you need to also appreciate was before the shooting even started, before the production was even underway, there was a rush in terms of the pre-production, right? And what do the experts say? What do armorers say about pre-production? What should you have in place by a certain point, right? So the untold story was the rush during the pre-production phase, especially to recruit an armorer. That really needs to be emphasized. Hannah wasn't a second choice or even a fifth choice. Did you guys know that? It wasn't like they chose Hannah as the second choice. Hannah was like, after dozens of candidates, Hannah's name eventually came forward. It might not be dozens, it might be a dozen, but it was many, many candidates, right? One of these candidates said that he could see massive red flags in terms of safety, even from a mile away. And his name was Zaromsky, right? So, and I think that comes from this article. I think it's from this article. At 9 p.m. on September 20th, so this was just a month and a day before the incident. It was 9 p.m. when the Rust production manager, Roe Walters, reached out to see if Zaromsky, that's an armorer, was interested in becoming the props master for the film. An hour later, Zaromsky replied by email that he was very interested, right? So, yeah, you've now got a second armorer who's basically engaged with, and he says, yes, I am interested in this. And so you kind of got to ask, and excuse my French, what the fuck is going on with this production that they get an armorer and the armorer is interested, and then they just don't end up getting the armorer. And then they get another armorer and the armorer is interested and they just end up not getting the armorer. What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is going on? So an hour later, Zaromsky says, I'm very interested. And then, according to this article, the two sides engaged in conversations throughout the week. What do you think that was? What do you think engaged in conversation means? It means they were negotiating. Negotiating about what? I'm very interested in the role. I'd like to do, I want this job. Okay, but ... this, that, and the next thing. And so guess what happens? Zaromsky changes his mind. And why do you think he changes his mind? According to the article, he cited several concerns. Money is the one thing, right? But it's also this whole business of combining the two roles. And these armorers are experienced enough to know what they're worth, and experienced enough to know that this thing that you're trying to do is just not going to work. If you try and do it the way you're trying to do it, it's just not going to work. So this is what he said. He said he felt that the Rust production managers were being evasive when he asked about specific terms of his potential employment, specifically the budget. So you're right about the money. But he was saying that the budget for the entire movie. So let me stop right there and ask you guys, do you guys know what the budget was for Rust? You guys want to offer a few guesses what you think the budget was for this film? Any ideas? Let's see what you guys say. So this was Zaromsky's concern when he found out, well, the overall budget for this film is X. So Hillary says 4 million. It's not quite 4 million. Judy says 3 million. Terry says 2 million. The Songbird says 2 million. Okay, the answer is yeah, that's right, 7 million. Yvonne, I think you read the script, so I don't know if that counts. So yeah, it was 7 million, and 7 million may sound like a lot, but movies like Avatar, The Way of Water, I think cost 600 million to make, something like that. So anyway, 7 million. And so what Zaromsky said, that seems like too small a budget for the type of film the producers are attempting to make. And only like an experienced armorer could kind of say that. Only an experienced armorer could say, from a mile away, I can see what you're trying to do here. And the amount of money you've got, it just doesn't really, it worries me. It worries me that, wow, is Alec Baldwin in it? Wow, is Jensen Ackles in it? Wow, is that actor in it? What's the budget? 7 million. 7 million. And you're trying to do that, and that. And you've got a crew of 90 people. So thanks, Yvonne. You say you got that information from other videos. That's good to hear. So he couldn't get an answer on the budget for his kit, which is industry jargon for his cache of props needed to stock the set. So he was asking for specific answers. He was saying, how much money are you going to give me for my kit? And that they couldn't really answer him. And that he didn't really like that. Right? Then he said he became alarmed, he became scared, because just 2 weeks before Rust was supposed to begin filming, just 2 weeks, the producers hadn't yet hired a prop master. And this is when you get a sense of the whole production is actually in disarray, right? You get a sense that only an experienced person would know, well, by that time, all of these things need to be slotted into place. By that point, these milestones need to be met. And so from a mile away, this guy can see, jeepers, this isn't looking very good. You know what? I don't actually want to be involved in this production. And in the 60 Minutes Australia production, the stunt coordinator said something like 75% of the crew, I can't quite remember how he put it. He either said 75% of the crew were inexperienced, or I think he said that they were very young. I can't quite remember. But you kind of got the idea that by far the majority of the people on this movie seemed to be somewhat green, put it that way. Yeah. So you've got these experienced armorers basically saying, uh-oh, I'm seeing red flags. You know, in the same way in the true crime community, we say red flag, red flag. They were seeing red flags, and they were right to see red flags. By the way, can you see in this image, you see that that upside down U-shaped thing, right? That's the same as the entrance. I think it's over here. That's that same thing over there. Sorry, that over there is the same as that over there. You see that? That over, yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was worth pointing out. And so this is this gives you a sense from a professional. You really needed to have all of these things in place long time ago so that things are set up and there's not going to be any rush, and everything has been properly figured out. You're not going to be figuring out during the actual production, where your hands are and where your feet are, where your head is and where your tail is. And in that sense, you kind of have a bit of sympathy for Hannah, that she was kind of doomed before the production even began, right? And then he also says the following: in the movies, the prep is everything. I'm going to put this up as kind of a highlighted comment. This is from Zoromsky. And I think it's kind of the same as climbing Mount Everest. It's not when you're actually climbing the mountain that really matters, although that does matter. It's actually all the preparation, all the climatization. You have the same thing happening here. You have the long run up that needs to be properly set up, and you need professional people that know about pacing, right? People that are experienced know this is the pacing. It's a kind of the same operation, making a movie and doing everything that needs to be done in pre-production, and climbing Mount Everest and knowing all the things that need to be done before Summer Day, before you start your assault on the mountain. Does that make sense? And so he says prep is everything, and prep was very much behind schedule and a catastrophe leading up to this whole thing, which ultimately led to 6 members of the camera crew quitting, because they were like, this is a fuck up, right? And so he says you need time to clean, inspect, and repair guns. You need time to fix old clocks. In period films, you are sometimes using antiques. And he said, but here in this movie, there was absolutely no time to prepare, and that gave me a bad feeling, right? So what he was basically saying is, I've got a bad feeling about this. And he was right. It's just like, you know what, you're not given enough time. And so I've got a bad feeling about this. And he was right. So can you see that in terms of this question that we've been asking, right? Let me make that on full screen. Can you see in terms of this question that we've been asking, the answer is time. Let's let that sink in for a moment. It's time, but also that whole thing with making movies, time is money. So it's money, but essentially it was time as well. The answer is time. They'd run out of time. So on September, so this is from another article from the LA Times. Can you guys see that? Rust crew describes on-set gun safety issues and misfires days before the fatal shooting. And this is from October 22nd. This is one day after the incident. One day after the incident. So let me read what it says here. On September 21st, exactly 1 month before Hutchins was shot, Gabrielle Pickle reached out to Scott Sarge Rasmussen, an armorer in Albuquerque, right? 1 month before Halyna was shot, she reached out to Sarge Rasmussen. 2 days later, production managers advertised the position in an email blast and on an online portal that lists upcoming jobs for members of the International Alliance of theatrical stage employees, right? So you might say, I don't know what you're talking about. The answer is time. Listen to what we're going through here. 2 days later, the production managers advertised the position in an email blast, and the position read, Russ is in search of a prop master ASAP. Previous Western or armory experience is a plus, but not necessary. So they were even saying armory experience isn't even necessary. Can you believe it? Armory experience, not necessary. It's not really necessary to have armory experience. In a cowboy movie, fueled by, and then this is what the content from the article reads, fueled by generous tax credits and streamers hungry to produce new content after production delays due to COVID-19, producers had flocked to New Mexico. And here's the bottom line. This boom in making movies had strained the New Mexico hiring pool, leaving an insufficient number of experienced union film workers to staff all the productions clamoring to hire. So what is happening? Rust came into this competition. Rust came into this process late. Rust came into it too slowly. And what happened was all the armorers got snapped up. And by the time they basically woke up, all the armorers were basically gone. And they didn't really realize what a sort of bidding contest was going on, kind of a free fall that was going on. And when they looked again, they really couldn't find anyone. And they thought that they could probably negotiate with armorers and play hardball, and they could get the costs down. When they looked again, the armorer's gone, been snapped up by someone else. And then it says, during the week, this is again quoting from the LA Times, during the week of the IATSE job posting, the film's unit production managers were simultaneously trying to recruit Rasmussen and LA-based prop master Neil Zaromsky. And these were top props guys. These were good guys to have on your crew. But I think the mistake that they made was they didn't take the recruiting of these armorers seriously, where it should have been almost their number one priority. And I think arguably it should have been their number one priority. They were sort of, I think, almost like, how can I put it? You're trying to hire this guy, but you also got this guy, and you're trying to get the best deal for yourself. And because you are not taking it seriously enough, you end up losing both of them, right? Can you see that? In other words, they took their time hiring, thinking that they could get a better deal, and ended up losing both of them. That's just these two individuals. And yeah, because both eventually turned down the job. Rasmussen has nearly half a century of experience. That's this guy. Where is it? That's this guy. He's got nearly half a century of experience, but he wasn't interested in being both prop master and armorer. He said he offered to serve only as the armorer, but they never heard back. Zaromsky said he had a bad feeling about it. Rasmussen, like Rasmussen, he was put off by the producer's insistence that one person performed two important, time-consuming jobs. Can you see how the answer is time? In other words, they wanted one guy to do two jobs. And so it's time. That's their concern. That's their concern. But the concern from the producers was sort of, how can we save money while we can have one guy doing both of these things? But it ends up being a time issue because they realized too late that that's the wrong approach, right? And they realized it's also the wrong approach because even these armorers are thinking, you don't really have enough money and it's too late. I mean, the production starts then, right? The problem here is it's sort of money and time, but especially time. And then this is the bottom line. Much of the prop master's work, including sourcing a multitude of period-specific objects, this is from the article, and weapons needed for a Western, takes place during prep. Several experienced prop masters said they would expect at least 2 weeks prep time for a film like Rust, which was set in the 1880s. Prop masters want to make sure props look authentic and in a usable condition. Time was running out. Cameras were set to roll October 6. That's in the article. Time was running out. So again, if you're starting to think, why did this happen? Why did this Rust incident happen? The answer is time. In the 60 Minutes documentary, you also hear the stunt coordinator saying that Halyna, I think, went to him, or someone went to Halyna and said something like, we quickly want to shoot this rehearsal thing. We quickly need to get this scene before we do something else. You kind of got the idea that they were trying to squeeze in something else. And even though 6 members of the crew had quit, they just continued working as though they hadn't quit at all. And when they came in after lunch, it was almost like did Hannah know that they were going to do this rehearsal? I mean, why did she load the gun with dummy rounds if you're going to do a rehearsal when you didn't even need it loaded at all? Do you know what I'm saying? If Hannah knew they were doing a rehearsal, there was no need to even load the gun, because a rehearsal, the rules say with a rehearsal that you can only use a plastic gun or a replica, and you don't need anything in a rehearsal situation. So there was no even need for Hannah to be checking anything. Also, there was no need for Baldwin to be pulling a trigger or anything, because it was all a rehearsal. That was the intention. Anyway, so at least 2 weeks prep time is the norm, and these invoice dates are, if these invoice dates are accurate, then it appears Hannah had 4 days prep time. So 2 weeks prep time is the industry standard. If these invoice dates are accurate, and I'm sure they are, then Hannah only had 4 days prep time. If you look at this invoice, it's dated 17th October 2021. That's 4 days before the incident. That was when all of these weapons were ordered. Almost $13,000 worth of weapons. If you look at this invoice, it's dated October 19, and that's $6,000, almost $6,000 worth of ammunition that was ordered. That's 2 days before the incident. Can you see the answer is time? Gaylor says also, if pay is low, you're going to spend 2 weeks out in the desert. Who wants that? Yeah, it's certainly not going to, you're going to get stretched thin eventually, right? Okay, so that's a second invoice, and here's a third invoice. I thought I had another invoice. There is another invoice for I think, costumes. So this is what you're seeing on your screen now is the documentary from 60 Minutes. I played that right at the beginning of this live stream, but there you get confirmation of them going back to the armorer in the middle of the production and saying to Sarge Rasmussen, okay, we do want you now. And Sarge said, sorry, I've already been hired on something else. That's him talking in this production, right? And once again, you see the answer is time, but then he's already, sorry, you ran out of time, I went on to something else, right? So can you see the answer is time? Why was Halyna shot? They were pressed for time, and they were pressed for time because it was low budget. Low budget was why Hannah was hired, and this cost cutting led to safety problems and then safety violations. It was an accident waiting to happen, wasn't it? Let me repeat that. So if you're asking the question, why did this happen? And that is why that was the theme of this live, right? To finally answer that question, right? So see if you agree with what I've sort of assessed it as, in my opinion. Why was Halyna shot? Because they were pressed for time. And they were pressed for time because it was low budget. Low budget was why Hannah was hired. And this cost cutting led to safety problems and then safety violations. It was an accident waiting to happen. And so this is kind of, I think, the bottom line. Who is responsible for time? Have you ever thought of that question in terms of this case? Who's responsible for time on a movie set? Is it the actor's responsibility? Is it the armorer's responsibility? I'm saying ultimately responsible for time. Well, it's not Hannah. It's not Hannah's responsibility to do things based on a schedule that someone else has come up with. Whose responsibility is time? Whose idea was this movie? Right? Whose idea is this movie? When are we going to make the movie? Right? Whose idea was the movie? And there's your answer. There's your why. So I hope you found this analysis took you to places that you haven't been before, got you to think about this story in a way that you haven't thought about before. I think in a way it's a very, very complicated crime scene because there are so many moving parts. And because it's so unconventional, you've got to think about the law. You've got to also think about different people in different roles. It's not like when you're talking about the University of Idaho, well, you're just talking about students. They're all in the same role. Now you're talking about someone who's in a particular role, and in terms of their role, they've got a particular responsibility. They've got a responsibility in terms of their role, but they've also got perhaps a broader responsibility in terms of the overall production. And so that's what makes this case, to me, really interesting from a legal perspective. And I hope you found some of this analysis takes you into areas that really, expand your familiarity with the whole true crime thing. And I think it also kind of reminds you of that whole thing where, all of the interviews that ALEC Baldwin gave, it's like a version, almost like someone being in a cubicle or whatever, someone giving their version, right? Are you able to treat that, think about that critically? Obviously, you're getting some information from that person, but how are you going to get other information? Where are you going to get other information? And can you really rely on the information you're getting from the inside of this crew, the inside of this production, given that one of the people charged is in charge of the whole production? And so where we've really made some progress in this presentation is we've gotten some insight from people totally outside of the production. Armorers that were approached but ultimately not hired. Why? Because they don't really have a horse in this race, right? Thanks a lot, Terry. Thank you. Yeah, and so that's my spiel. There's another picture of Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. And bear in mind, all of this took place during the pandemic. That was another aspect that I think added to the stress and strain of everything else, right? So Yeah, I wrote this quite a few days ago. I put a lot of work into it, a lot of effort into it, and I was really itching to share it with you because I thought sometimes you kind of have that moment of clarity. You see into the whole thing, and like I say, just that shift in perspective helps you to then see all the other shifts in perspective that you need to do. And so I hope you found this analysis kind of scintillating, like really just clarified things that seemed vague and unclear. I hope I was able to make it clear. Just the last couple of images. Thanks a lot. Wow, Sinan, thanks a lot. The last couple of images I want to show you. What you see in that image is members of the crew putting up their hands to say, yes, I was in the church at the time of the incident. I'm not quite sure why his hand isn't up. And does anyone know who this individual is here? This blonde lady. Is it Gabrielle Pickle or is it Roe Walters? I would be interested to know. But you actually see her sitting beside Baldwin in some of the images. That is the stunt coordinator, and he's saying that he actually put ordnance, he put certain things that were supposed to go off to simulate gunshots, I guess, on the ceiling. And have you seen this image before? This is the bench that Alec Baldwin was actually sitting on. I don't know if that is where he was sitting, but it's either there or there. I think that is where he was sitting. And I think that is Halyna's shirt over there. It's possible that it's the director's shirt. I can't be 100% sure, but I think but what you do get from this image is a sense of the distance from where Alec Baldwin was sitting. Bear in mind, he was sitting when he did that cross draw, right? He was sitting over here. And then this is where the victims were lying down, literally a few feet away. And there was someone who left a comment saying, you know what, they were not shot point blank. But if you're standing here and someone's holding a gun there, that's really not a very long distance. It's something like 2 feet, right? And bear in mind, she stumbled a step or two back before she hit the ground. And there's a close-up of her mask and of her shirt. And we've seen that image before, but we haven't seen it zoomed out as far. There's the director. And he was actually wearing similar trousers and shoes on the day of the incident. This, I think, is a dummy cowboy. I don't think it's a real cowboy. And then what this guy is going to do is he's going to jump off that box, which is going to pull this guy against these boards. So it's going to look like he's been struck in the chest, and then hits the board behind him. This is not a real person. Thanks a lot, Letty. Thanks very much. Scott says he is real. It doesn't look real to me, but what do I know? Anyway, there's another picture of Halyna. There's a picture of the gun cart that you may not have seen before, but there are bullets all over the place. Some of them are live rounds as well. I think that is what you put in your ears if there's very loud, bangs and so on. I think that's for ear protection. That grey bag is Hannah's moon bag, and I think this holster also had a live round in it. And I'm not sure if that's a bandolier, but the bandolier also had a live round in it. I'm not actually sure if this is Alec Baldwin's holster, but if it is, it had a live round in it as well. They found, I think, 1 or 2 additional live rounds on the prop cart. So I was going to do another video just saying briefly that they knew Hannah was rusty, which is why they went back to try and hire Sarge Rasmussen. And then I just want to end off on this picture of Hannah. You don't often get this kind of intimate look at her face, but it's just a reminder that we may talk about this case in a sort of cerebral way and say, this was rushed and this and that and the next thing. But at the end of the day, someone lost her life when she really didn't need to, when she really shouldn't have, right? Someone who was 42 years old, the mother of a little boy, and also a wife. And she had her whole life ahead of her. And, she was, unlike Gabby Petito, who was starting her adventure, Halyna was quite far along in her adventure. Her adventure was gathering momentum, right? And she just happened to be in front of a loaded gun without knowing it, and could easily have just been somebody else. And, we've looked at Gabby Petito, her face today, and all the victims in all of these cases we deal with are really tragic. It's not like that's quite tragic or whatever. All of them are extremely, extremely tragic and heartbreaking. And when you look at Halyna, could just as well have been you, right? When you look at the shirt that she was wearing, I'm wearing a shirt now, could just as well have been your shirt with a bullet hole through it. And that's all that is left to speak for you. And part of why I've done this is who's going to speak for Halyna? Is Alec Baldwin going to speak for her? Is Hannah Gutierrez-Reed going to speak for her? Is any member of the crew really going to speak for her? Right? And so I've kind of taken it upon myself to try to tell the story around her story in an authentic way. And it's taken about 90 plus episodes to do that. But eventually you do sort of get there. Eventually you do get to, well, pretty close, I think, to the authentic narrative. It is very unfair. It is very unfair. Okay, so that is it from me. Timmy, do you want to say goodbye? So Timmy wants to make an appearance, and I just want to thank the mods. Iceland, thanks very much. Terry Dean, thank you. Is SM Kovalinsky still here? I just want to thank you guys for being here. Marcus, I'm glad that you were able to make it. I know you're not able to make a lot of the lives, but glad you were able to make this one. Marcus, I'm going to be covering Nicola Bulley, and I'll be doing that for the British audience, so you should be able to get that. It might be at 8 o'clock our time, right? So hopefully we'll see you there for that as well, and some of our British subscribers. Let's go through the last couple of comments. Thanks a lot, Paddy. Paddy, we really want to talk about the work you're doing and your thoughts about some of the really serious events going on in Europe. So if you're available and if you figured stuff out, please let us know. Sounds good, Marcus. Cool. Thanks, Cyber Sleuth. Thank you, TN. Appreciate your appreciation. V Slims, thanks very much. So thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thanks, guys, for the super chats. If you've been with me since the beginning of this live, I've just put up a video on the Idaho case. So check that out, and I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe. And as I say, I'll be covering Nicola Bully, 8 p.m. local time, my time, and British time. So see my British and European subscribers then. Okay, have a good sleep, those of you in Hawaii, California, North America. I hope you guys have a good sleep. Take care. Mods, thanks a lot for your good work here, and I'll see you guys next time. Timmy, say goodbye. Cheers, guys.